أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Chapter 8. Liberalism. Liberal hypocrisy. Liberalism doesn't see anything wrong with incest. Incest is still illegal in the West, but whenever an incestuous couple is arrested, the reactions on social media represent a shift in attitudes on this despicable act. These two are two consenting adults. They love each other, and that's all that matters. Just because it's disgusting to us doesn't mean it should be considered immoral, much less illegal. They're not harming anyone. But let's stop and ask, why is not harming anyone required for something to be morally permissible? What's so bad about harming others? Sure, if we think about harming others, that might make us feel bad or even disgusted. It might cause us anger, but that doesn't mean that it is immoral. In moral philosophy, there is a theory of morality called emotivism. Emotivism says that our moral judgments are nothing but expressions of emotions. When we say X is wrong, what that really amounts to, and hence what it really means, is just X makes me feel bad. Of course, feelings are subjective. Different people can and will feel different things about X. As such, anyone who attempts to make a factual claim like X is wrong as a matter of fact, as if that is universally or objectively the case, is simply making a category error. As an analogy, just because I don't like the taste of coconut, for example, that doesn't mean that eating coconut is wrong. There are obviously many problems with emotivism, but it is interesting how liberals use emotivism for their purposes and use it selectively. For those moral proscriptions they disagree with, liberals jump straight to emotivisms. For example, incest is not wrong just because it makes you feel icky. But for those moral proscriptions that they believe in, emotivism goes out the window. For example, harming others is the very essence of immorality and something that we have to use the force of law to prevent. The simple question is, why the selectivity? Why draw the line at this notion of harm, which itself is loosely defined and selectively applied? If you press liberals to explain why harming others is immoral, this forces them to get into a meta-ethical and metaphysical issues that they attack atheists for. Either they have to dig in their heels and say it's immoral because it just is, or they will just bite the bullet, reject the notion of morality in its entirety, and embrace what amounts to some form of nihilism. This can be responded to on its own terms, but even absent that, to simply get a liberal to admit he is essentially a nihilist is itself a win that can be leveraged in further arguing against him. This is how you play chess with these liberal humanists. Call them out for their atrocious selectivity, and the checkmate will be close at hand. Liberal moral progress. The consent taboo. Prominent atheists like Lauren Krauss and Richard Dawkins have expressed their support for incest. They argue that as long as sex is between two consenting adults, then it should be permitted, even if it's between mother and son, daughter and father, siblings with each other. This is a similar pattern in atheistic secular ethics, taboo breaking. Fornication was always seen as immoral, but then secular ethics tells us that it's just an irrational taboo. Sodomy was always seen as vile, but then secular ethics tells us that it's just an irrational taboo born out of emotionality rather than reason and is therefore invalid. And now the same thought process applies to sex with immediate family members. But why should this habitual boundary stomping and taboo breaking from atheists stop there? What is stopping us from seeing the idea of consent as an irrational taboo driven by emotion? What makes consent so different from these other discarded taboos? An atheist secularist could argue that just like backwards people believe sodomy to be a disgusting and unnatural, ungodly act, similarly backwards people irrationally believe that sex without consent is a disgusting violation, and in both cases, there is no rational scientific reason to abide by such outdated taboos. Now, before anyone accuses me of promoting rape, I am simply arguing on the basis of atheist morality, not my own. Does atheistic secular morality provide a rational or scientific justification for the importance of consent? Not at all. The vast majority of atheists today are liberals, and they abide by liberal utilitarian ethics. According to utilitarianism, whatever maximizes pleasure and minimizes harm, broadly speaking, is morally good, and whatever maximizes harm and minimizes pleasure is morally evil. As they often put it, what doesn't harm others should be legal and morally permissible. This notion of harm and pleasure is implicit in all liberal arguments regarding sexuality. A taboo, according to utilitarianism, is meaningless because pleasure and harm are the ultimate determinants of morality. not whether or not people feel icky, as they put it. Well, in that case, there are numerous examples of non-consensual acts that increase total pleasure and minimize harm. Consider voyeurism. A utilitarian could install a secret camera in a woman's public bathroom and broadcast a live feed to millions of voyeurs around the world. Their aggregate pleasure would skyrocket, and there would be minimal harm since the woman wouldn't know that they were being recorded. Their faces could also be blurred to protect their identities. Either way, the overall pleasure far outweighs the harm. An atheist could say, look, there's nothing wrong with this, since no one is harmed, and the net pleasure is huge. And the insistence of consent is just a backwards, silly taboo that we all need to collectively get over. If atheists and liberal secularists were inconsistent, they would promote this kind of voyeurism just as much as they would promote incest, LGBT, etc. This is among the many reasons atheism and secularism more broadly are nihilistic and, when taken to their ultimate conclusions, are clearly absurd and should be rejected by all rational people. The fake tolerance of liberalism. The liberal charge, you are not tolerant. The translation, you do not tolerate the precise things that I tolerate. One of the definitions of tolerance in the English language is an allowable amount of variation of a specified quantity, especially in the dimensions of a machine or part. Manufactured parts are never exactly the same. If a factory produces, say, 100,000 pistons, no two pistons will be exactly equal. There is always variation, but that variation has to be within a specific tolerance. If a specific piston is beyond tolerance, it is deemed dysfunctional and has to be trashed. Liberals pretend to be infinitely tolerant and accuse others of being intolerant when in reality their tolerance has limits. Infinite tolerance, of course, is an oxymoron, a contradiction in terms. The difference is liberal tolerance is ultimately based on whims and haphazard cultural beliefs, whereas Islamic tolerance is based on hikmah and guidance. If we go back to the example of the manufactured mechanical part, if the tolerance levels are not correctly calibrated, the resulting parts will be dysfunctional and useless. Similarly, for human beings, the right kind of variation is tolerable, but not all kinds of variation can lead to a functioning, healthy human being, and who would know better about human health, function, and well-being. And who would know better about human health, function, and well-being in the truest sense of those words than the creator and maintainer of humankind? Liberalism is not merely irrational, it is sheer madness. A dubious thesis. Early liberal capitalist thinkers maintained the belief that acting in a self-interested fashion is to act rationally, and if everyone were to act rationally, then that is all that is needed for society as a whole to flourish. A really dubious thesis. Contemporary liberalism takes things a step further. Who's to say that rationality even consists of and what interests are indeed rational to pursue? For society to truly flourish, people should just pursue whatever makes them feel good, so long as it's harmless and consensual, of course. And then people wonder why the world is a mess. Liberal secularism's biggest deceit. What matters is not what you choose, but the fact that you have a choice. This is how liberal secularism attempts to nullify divine guidance. If all that matters is choice, and what you actually end up choosing is irrelevant, then what need do you have for guidance? What need do you have for light pointing you in the right direction, pointing you to the decisions that will bring you happiness and success? Is there any philosophical or ethical system as vacuous as liberal secularism? Other man-made systems at least make an attempt to guide humanity with practical advice and principles that in theory should lead to individual and collective felicity. But liberal secularism doesn't bother with that. All we need, according to it, is just to make a choice without any hindrance in doing so. Any choice. Even if you choose the most destructive, vile, nonsensical choice, as long as you freely made that choice. It is infinitely better than not having a choice, or worse, having God tell you what is the right choice and making you feel bad for making the wrong choice. There never was a more incoherent way of thinking, but it is this thinking that rules the hearts of modern men. Liberal faux theology. The liberal theist's theology. There is no God except the God that different cultures created for themselves. Then each group attempts to impose their version of God on everyone else because people are selfish and mean and hateful. If only people realize that God doesn't exist in any objective, i.e. meaningful sense, and is at most an impersonal deity, we could all worry about more important things like celebrating the right of bourgeoisie men to sodomize each other. If you were to compare the theology of liberal secularists to atheism, you would find them to be, for all intents and purposes, identical philosophies. God is just something people imagine for themselves. Religion is nothing more than a human expression. There is no independent God or objective morality to worry about, other than liberal morality, of course, which just happens to coincide with the prevailing cultural proclivities of Northwestern Europeans and Americans. Sadaqallahu al-Azim.